And the BAFTA for Game Beyond Entertainment goes to Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice.
When Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice arrived in 2017, it broke even on its budget within 3 months and sold more than 1 million copies in its first year after release. Hellblade even won 5 coveted BAFTA awards due in large part to developer Ninja Theory's incredible cinematography, motion capture, and sound design. But what really made Hellblade special was its empathetic portrayal of a traumatized Celtic warrior dealing with psychotic episodes as she attempts to reckon with her past. Hellblade went from being yet another hyperlinear third-person action-adventure game with lots of walking or shimmying across tight or narrow spaces into being something rich, insightful, and moving like few games before it. Hell, even my cat Maynard likes it, and I have never seen him this excited by something on screen before. Now, part of the press circuit for this impressive game was Ninja Theory making quite a to-do about consulting with mental health professionals like Cambridge's Dr. Paul Fletcher and several folks who experienced psychosis from the nearby Recovery College East. A cynic might assume that Ninja Theory is showing off a bit, but it makes sense that they would make sure that we knew that they were working to understand the complicated topic that they wished to pursue. And Ninja Theory's seen almost unanimous praise for their depiction of mental health. But as I reviewed footage for this otherwise conventional retrospective, I began to wonder if perhaps this game's authenticity and impact are a bit overblown, that we're a little too easily impressed by well-meaning intentions. So pleased are we that we can finally relate to someone with mental illness instead of it just being an excuse for villains to do bad things, like it is in so many other games. At first, this retrospective was just going to be effusive praise for Ninja Theory, joining in the throng of everyone else saying the same thing because, for all I knew, they were as on point as everyone said they were. But one scene in particular caught me off guard, and makes me wonder if Ninja Theory is perhaps saying a little too much in their attempts to be empathetic. At one point in the story, Senua leaves her disruptive family behind to live with her lover Dillion and his warrior clan and work on her mental health. But Dillion himself says that he loves her just the way she is, and asks whether she should try to cure her psychotic symptoms, or wish for them to be cured, as they come from a place of creativity and intuition that allows her to learn quickly how to become a great fighter, and she can even tell when a river is poisoned whereas others can't. And while the idea that creative minds can often bear mental disorder is certainly supported by academic literature, I found it to be a slippery proposition to presume that mental disorder and creativity weren't simply highly correlative, but possibly causal, that as if they were so intertwined that if you kryptonited one away, it would disintegrate the other so they might lose their psychotic superpowers, if you will. It was a troubling proposition, and one which made me ask these questions. Does Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice actually portray psychosis in an overall helpful way, or does it overstate and misattribute positive aspects to psychosis in a misguided attempt to show appreciation for those suffering from it? Is this even Ninja Theory speaking, or merely meant to illustrate an archetype of a well-meaning but still ignorant character like Dillion? Is Hellblade merely the unfortunate but unsurprising experience for neurotypicals by neurotypicals that awkwardly appropriates a state of being we can only get so right with personal knowledge? These are the tough questions I began to wrestle with, and the ones which I aim to answer today. And before we continue, I do want to point out that just like Ninja Theory or anyone else, no matter how well-intentioned I may be, I may also make mistakes in how I perceive and commentate on mental issues that are experientially so different from my own. So please bear with me if I do make those mistakes, and kindly point them out and correct them if you're so inclined. Now, as for the business of understanding how good of a game Hellblade is, as well as how representative of its mental health topic it turned out to be, we'll start out with what the germ of its story was for writer and director Tamim Antoniades, how it got made, how it feels to play, and what it can teach us even if sometimes it strays a little bit from its mission statement. That means I'll be going mostly chronologically throughout the game, stopping as we go to draw out the important bits as they arise. That also means loads of spoilers front, left, and center with no room to hide, so watch out for that if you're planning to enjoy this story for yourself before hearing my thoughts. So without further ado, let's get stuck in like a magical sword in a dream tree and figure out what makes this game so special and whether it sticks the landing on its important themes. Mental illness has a long history of being used in video games. Vivid hallucinations, memory loss, and hearing voices aren't anything new, and they're often used as generic shorthand. Often these symptoms are used as ways to obscure twists, like in Silent Hill 2 and Spec Ops: The Line, or to allow level designers to run wild because of the dream logic of hallucinations, like you might see in The Evil Within. Now, there's nothing wrong with these in theory, and ironically, Hellblade does employ both of these tropes. But Hellblade also does a lot more to show the moment-to-moment intensity of these psychotic episodes, and doesn't just use them as plot devices. So let's see how deep they went and just how much they repeat some old tricks and what new ones they bring to the table. Now first off, before we go any further, let's clarify what psychosis actually is. Psychosis is actually defined as a loss of contact with reality. Dr. Paul Fletcher, who is the major consultant on psychosis for this game, has an interesting inflection on this definition.
Or more accurately, I think, the experience of an unshared reality.
So instead of being a condition unto itself, psychosis is a collection of symptoms that include hearing voices, seeing hallucinations, having delusional beliefs, and seeing patterns and shapes where there may be none intended. These can stem from a variety of impetuses like trauma, depression, including postpartum, sleep deprivation, schizophrenia, and even from some drug use, just to name a few. Now, of course, Ninja Theory may have just not wanted to have to say that Senua deals with, likely, schizophrenia, depression, PTSD, and whatever else every time they were asked to describe what the game is about. So noting the symptoms may just be easier to say, and also more explicit as it relates to gameplay scenarios. But I just wanted to clear that up in case that was of any confusion for you. I will say this, it is surprising that Ninja Theory went in for such a rigorous topic to base their game around. I mean, let's not forget that the studio's previous game was the somewhat controversial Devil May Cry in 2013, which was criticized for its cringy edgelordiness that even extended to Dante's model being based on the likeness of writer and director Timi Mantegna's. Ugh, yikes.
If you're calling me a son of a bitch, you wouldn't be the first.
So to see no sign of cringe in Hellblade is refreshing and quite a pleasant surprise. Mantegna's first conceived of Hellblade as a classic hero's journey where the fantastical story didn't take place in a physical place but in Senua's mind. Now, this is nothing incredibly new and felt like the average, let's use the ambiguity of mental disorder to provide the bed for fantastic imagery and shifting level design, much like The Evil Within did, as we said. But Mantegna's soon found that the traumatic story he envisioned called for a much more measured understanding of what Senua's psyche would be, and how it would react to the incredible suffering that she would endure. Mantegna's notes that this path was risky, as so often psychotic episodes are conflated with psychopathy, which are disorders based on a lack of empathy. Not to mention that getting this right and justifying the risk taken required a certain level of rigorous research to make it authentic. Hellblade can get a little overwrought and melodramatic and possibly even a little problematic, as the kids say, but it's always genuine and attempting to be tactful and respectful in its approach to the central topic of Senua's mental health. All parties consulted, both medical and first-hand experiencers of psychosis, do seem to appreciate Ninja Theory's work here, so that's a really nice thing. In fact, I'd say one of the biggest endorsements of the team's modus and grasp of the concepts at play is their casting of Senua's actress Melina Jurgens. She started out as a Ninja Theory video editor and stand-in for motion capture and pre-production, before the power of her performance convinced Mantegna's and the company to give her the role. She had actually never professionally acted or video edited before Hellblade.
And I knew her well enough to know that I didn't have to teach her to act, but to relive her own internal pain. As often is the case, those who have suffered mental anguish are never far from us.
The role of a lifetime had found Jurgens, an actress whose personal experience could provide an especially vivid window into the life of someone of such specific but important to understand life experience as Senua. We'll get more into how Senua is realized through technical innovation later, but for now, let's unpack how the character was conceived from a storytelling perspective before we get into the story proper. Senua's name is actually a misreading of the Celtic goddess named Senuna, who was only recently revealed to historians in 2002 when they found numerous offerings to her in an English field. Mantegna's used the name simply because he liked the sound and feel of it, but I like to think that choosing an incorrect or imprecisely applied name for her is a great metaphorical detail for Senua not feeling like she can trust herself even down to her own name. Mantegna's imagines Senua to be something like Boudica, the Celtic warrior who unsuccessfully stood up to the advance of the Romans, but has been lauded ever since for her bravery and leadership in doing so. She also bears some resemblance to Senua's experience because she saw many ghosts of her family members. Now, Senua started to take her own shape as she took on Boudica's qualities, but also those of the one tribe that the Romans could never seem to put down, the Picts, who reside in what we call Scotland today. Senua gets her extremely stiff 420 blazing hairstyle and war paint from this barbaric tribe, who were so fearsome that the Romans had to construct Hadrian's Wall to keep them at bay, almost literally. Senua grew up in the real-world place of Orkney, one of the Scottish Isles, which was invaded by Norse Vikings in the 8th century, who likely wiped the Picts out. Now, the Picts were legendarily brutal, but the Vikings would go so far as to sacrifice the leaders of the tribes they conquered in horrific ways, including the disputed act of the Blood Eagle, where the victim's ribs would be cracked and splayed open like an eagle's wings. It's this act that puts Senua on her great quest, the razor's edge of trauma that has her remembering the great Norse stories of old that her friend Druth told her, and that become the emotional and narrative backdrop of the story. Speaking of that story, let's go ahead and begin telling it.
Hello. Who are you?
This narrator is one of the many voices that Senua hears, and she's ostensibly asking you to introduce yourself as the player, a new voice in Senua's head. But I think there's a sneaky bit of double meaning here. The narrator might as well be asking Senua who she is at the beginning of her vision quest, her hero's journey, because technically, you the player are still inhabiting a voice, which of course is a generation of Senua's mind. Senua rose measuredly, her eyes darting with a searching, open nature that contrasts with the almost sinister energy seething from the bloody head tied to her waist. The narrator tells us that the other voices, called Furies, are mostly new, or if they're old, they were changed by the tragedy. But what tragedy? Did Senua kill someone, or was someone killed? Who is this Dillion the voices keep mentioning? Is he dead because of her? Am I asking too many questions? Good. That's the point. Ninja Theory gets us right into the mindset of one of psychosis's classic symptoms of voice hearing, and they're brought to life by what's called the 3D binaural sound recording technique. This technique orientates two different microphones in much the same configuration as a person's two ears, allowing for sound pickup from both sides of a space, which means that performers can start making a sound on one side and travel to the other side while making the sound, and the mics will pick it up seamlessly as the human ears would, creating a sense of movement and dynamism, and thus a 3D binaural effect. Those with psychosis who hear voices have reported that this is exactly how many of the voices sound and move around them. So this is a pretty smart move by Ninja Theory to realize this. And aside from its educational factor, it's also just a really sensorily affecting choice. It's so intentional and unique, I wouldn't mind seeing it a lot more in other games, but I do appreciate the fact that the only reason it came up here was to simulate a real-world sensation that helps us understand those who have this condition. But back to the game. As Senua rose, these 3D binaural enhanced voices of the Furies tell her of the great supernatural stakes at play here. Senua seeks the Norse concept of hell, the place where souls are taken but do not rest. As she passes the ravaged bodies on either side, the Furies become intrusive thoughts that this will happen to her too if she doesn't turn back. The Furies tell us of her darkness, one of the central concepts of the game used to encapsulate the hardest parts of her condition, the ones that seek to pull her under. Here is our first deconstructive bit of storytelling.
You might think she's brave to go on this journey on her own, but it isn't bravery that drives her. Bravery only means something to those afraid of death. Senua's fear runs far, far deeper.
So, is Senua's quest delusional, self-aggrandizing, or even suicidal? It's hard to tell, but we get a sense of being pulled towards a very dark destiny that may have been embarked upon for well-meaning, but ultimately untenable reasons. As the voices ponder this, Senua seems to catch them in the act.
There's no going back.
She is determined to press on. We soon see our very first rune wheel, which functions like audio logs do in other games. When interacted with, the rune wheel plays a memory of our one-time mentor Druth telling us tales of Norse mythology that inspire and inform Senua's journey.
Do not forget my stories, Senua, because your darkness comes from hell, and your fate lies there.
Druth is a pretty compelling character and wonderfully voiced. Despite being seemingly an Irish slave of the Vikings, Druth has internalized much of the Norse Vikings mythology as his own, and he often appears to Senua in full FMV, which is a very unsettling visual quality. But we trust him, as he's promised to guide us in life and beyond. He tells us that our darkness comes from hell itself, and that we must journey there across a sea of knives and across the golden bridge to Helheim in order to relieve ourselves of this darkness. This means we must lay our dead lover Dillion's soul to rest in order to free him from Hela herself. This epic quest is in the vein of the recent God of Wars, complete with Norse mythology and a severed head on hip that we find belongs to Dillion. Druth's words are not only the frame for our journey, but the inspiration to press on. The Furies tell us that Dillion's head on her hip is lost and his soul can't be retrieved, but Senua takes comfort in the grand adventure, the call to action, that puts the fate of her beloved literally in her hands. And as we see how much control has been wrested away from her, how shunned and manipulated she's been, it makes sense why she would jump at the chance to take matters into her own hands. Now let's take a moment to examine just how we play out that adventure with Senua. As you can probably tell from this footage, Hellblade has a lot of walking. Usually the game is linear enough to make her slow movement bearable, or not as noticeable, but areas like this one promise openness but are really just dead ends where the team needed to go back and block more stuff off, especially this early in the game. The tight camera position and movement sway contributes greatly to the feeling that we are in her body, not merely pushing a character around like a shopping cart. But other than her walking speed being pretty laborious to endure, especially when backtracking, I'm a big fan of the animations and the general feel and weight of controlling Senua. Next, we encounter the puzzle elements of the game. Druth guides us to use our inner eye and focus to find runes in the environment to match the one on the door so we can unlock it and go through. While this all makes sense in a heightened reality video game kind of way, in Hellblade, there's more significance to this mechanic. A common feature of psychosis is inventing grand narratives for oneself, or attributing superpowers to yourself, or seeing hidden messages and symbols in otherwise innocuous objects or series of objects. These perceived patterns or symbols can often be part of a greater delusional belief system, and while we are much too early in the story to pass any judgment on whether these really exist, or if that even matters for Senua, this mechanic is repeated plenty of times in the world and is built out to be more than just video game nonsense by the Furies, so let's keep our inner eye on them as we go.
I spent 6 years enslaved in hell, but I watched the Northmen, learnt their ways.
I know you did.
You listened when everyone else laughed.
To be honest, it doesn't sound super healthy for Druth to be internalizing the mythology of his invaders and slavers, but this is the question that Ninja Theory keeps posing. Is trauma the impetus to seek out empowering narratives for ourselves, regardless of truth and regardless of whether we're sporting a diagnosable mental disorder? And is playing into these grand mythologies actually helpful for those with delusional aspirations anyway? Leonardo da Sicci, a YouTuber with psychosis who spoke on Hellblade, offers some enlightening answers.
Delusions of grandeur make you believe that you're capable of anything from controlling the weather and stock markets to your actions changing the fabric of destiny. You may even feel like you're cursed by higher beings and powers. The reason Hellblade works so well as a game is because this idea of a quest, to save the world, to save a loved one, to accomplish a task that no one else can, is a delusion. The reality is, we aren't alone in changing the world. We aren't alone in helping those we love.
Now, the question of whether these grand narratives is actually helpful or not hangs in our mind as we approach the first major hub of Hellblade and come upon the door to Helheim, Hela, and the way to free Dillion. We are soon enveloped by the aforementioned darkness, and we plead for Dillion's soul as we're seemingly infected by the darkness itself, it crawling up our arms towards our head. Then from the darkness, an animal skull-wearing barbarian appears, and we engage in what is a fairly simple hack-and-slash dueling combat system with him and several of his compatriots. The combat's fairly basic, but it's got some satisfying finisher moves and a really satisfying parry. We have a light attack, heavy attack, a dodge, a block, and a parry that slows down time and allows us to counterstrike. The most important part of combat for the game as a conveyor of psychosis, though, is how the Furies call out to you that someone's attacking you from off-screen. In any other game, this would just be Spider-Man's spider sense tingling and showing an indicator on screen, or in the Arkham games where Batman's intuition shows a similar kind of lightning indicator that means you need to parry or get hit. Here, the voices serve the same function almost to the letter, but our aforementioned friend Leonardo says this is actually a dangerous thing for someone who suffers, as he does, to start trusting the voices.
In Hellblade, your only indication is one of your voices telling you to watch out. And right there, that is dangerous. Developing trust with a hallucination is the first step to everything going awry. You listen to the voice and it feeds you information about a task, people, places, objects, the world, what people are really thinking, what they're feeling. You begin to believe it more and more and become dependent on it. They've been right about everything so far. Maybe they're right now, at a dark place. Maybe not believing what someone tells you is the right thing to do. Maybe pushing away my friends and family will be better for them. They don't need to deal with my problems. Maybe cutting into my arm will help ease the pain by releasing endorphins. Maybe killing myself will stop me being a burden to the people I love, and they can be happier without me.
And while Leonardo's commentary is very enlightening and useful for us in the real world, Ninja Theory's voices never tell you a lie. If they say someone's swinging at you, they are. There's no depth here where you'd have to pay attention to other stimuli to determine if they're lying, although the camera being pulled in very tight and the ability to only target one enemy at a time means you're heavily dependent on this vocal feedback to avoid off-screen attacks. Now, this makes total sense from a design perspective, as it's pretty hard to come up with an intuitive system to check on the fly the veracity of the voices. I'll I'll grant you. But it would have been cool to see Ninja Theory do something with this concept, as learning to trust the voices, if they're right about enough things, leads you to trust in them when they're guiding you towards much darker and more self-destructive ventures, which is really where Ninja Theory can make an incredible impact through having us act out psychotic episodes ourselves, in a way, and realize just how much these folks have to deal with in real life. But we'll return to this idea much later in the game, and hear a little more from Leonardo's perspective. For now, though, let's return to the combat proper. The game is very lenient about giving you time to recover from your wounds, but in this moment we're outmatched and must die per this sequence. Here is Ninja Theory's first and greatest gambit with Hellblade as a game, and not merely a story or commentary piece on psychosis. Upon falling in battle, the narrator tells us that the darkness is a rot that will keep spreading upon repeated death. We'll figure out why this appraisal of her condition is so pernicious soon, so remember this description. Ninja Theory then puts up a very non-diegetic glowing message that reads, "The dark rot will grow each time you fail. If it reaches Senua's head, your quest is over." Many players took this to mean that Hellblade had permadeath, that if you die too many times, you get your progress wiped and have to start over. And who can blame them? The game awkwardly stops letting the possibly unreliable narrator deliver information to the player, and instead seems to speak directly to them, as if from the developers' mouths. Ninja Theory has been a bit precious about this design choice and post-production coverage, saying they chose their words very carefully on purpose, and that this is actually meant to express Senua's self-doubt that she must succeed in the quest she sent herself on, or her mental illness will consume her. But if you choose to look like you're speaking directly to the player, instead of letting the Furies say this, you look like you're trying to make doubly sure that the player trusts you and pays attention and plays according to this mechanical instruction. So it's not right to blame some players who actually stopped playing the game because they didn't want to waste any more time on a game that they thought would erase their progress if they died too much. So while I get this conceptual intent, I don't think it makes any sense in this particular game to introduce this fake mechanic, this fake expectation, especially since it's not that easy to die, as the game likes to let you keep getting up so you can keep the narrative pace up. And because you rarely die, you can basically forget this message ever came up. It comes off as more a gimmick than a committed design choice. This misstep aside, though, we have bigger things to attend to. Druth tells Senua that in order to get past the Helheim gate and get to Hela, she must first face off against the fire giant Surt and the god of illusion, the Valravyn. Now, my first playthrough I did the Valravyn section second, but on my second playthrough I switched the order, and I think it's a better dramatic trajectory, so we'll follow that path. The Valravyn being a god of trickery and illusion, we must solve several puzzles that are all about looking at the environment from new perspectives. Sure, they're gamey, but this also speaks to what Senua needs to do in order to gain more control over her condition. The Valravyn's puzzles are similar to the rune hunting we did earlier, but focus more on changing perspective to reveal hidden clues and obtain enlightenment. Now, as we mentioned, psychosis can sometimes include seeing symbols and making connections between things that are totally based on your perception and don't necessarily reflect the intent or even the base reality of those objects as they exist in the objective world. I'm also reminded of the concept of pareidolia that the survival horror game Signalis first introduced me to. Pareidolia is not necessarily connected to mental disorder, but it does have some overlap, and is the tendency to perceive patterns or specific images like faces or animal shapes where there are none. It's a subset of apophenia, which is to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. I think this is one of the strongest approximations of psychosis in Hellblade, and is one of the game's more clever marriages between mechanics and education. It's important too because one of the negative side effects of psychosis can be paranoia and delusion, that you're finding the facts that no one else sees and making hitherto unknown but important connections. That's not to impugn those with psychosis, but that is what Hellblade seems to be leaning towards thematically, that this world is real to Senua, and certainly needs to be treated as if it is, because it's by definition all that Senua is feeling right now. But it does give the audience member an intuitive guide to know where the break from reality is likely occurring. Senua even wrestles with the idea of ending it all before remembering her promise to Dillion to keep going on, but with the caveat that she must kill the darkness that has become a part of her. But the narrator has other things in mind for Senua.
There is no such thing as victory when it comes to the darkness. It's like it doesn't want to kill her. Yet.
The Furies tell her that she's wasting her time giving into religious fervor that gives her justification and purpose, that her darkness cannot be beaten, only delayed. Now this sounds like an internalized stigma from outside Senua, and we'll soon find out how right that instinct is. Druth soon tells us his own backstory that informs us that he was once a man named Findon, whose sister was captured by the Vikings he called the Northmen. When Findon's father sent him to pay the Northmen for her release, they robbed him of his gold and chained him without food and water for a day before releasing him. Once he returned home, he found his father and brother had been killed in a fire set by his father's enemies. They invited Findon to a feast to make reparations for this betrayal, but this was a trap to sell him into slavery to the Northmen, and they supposedly took him to Hell. When the Northmen arrived in Orkney, they burned all that they saw, and Findon used this fire as a means to escape, knowing that the Northmen's fears of the fire giant Surt would compel them not to follow him. Now free to roam the wilds of Orkney, Findon becomes Druth. Druth never saw his sister again, but he finds a kindred spirit in Senua when she escapes to the wilds to deal with her own issues. But this time in the wilds where the two of them met also brought a certain darkness of its own, and the memory of it engulfs Senua. At this time in her life, Senua was what real-life Celtic cultures called a Gelt, which was someone who went into self-exile in the wilderness to come to terms with their mental disturbances. Senua does the same and makes a friend in the traumatized Druth, who found a listener for his stories and someone who could empathize with his pain. He gave her a mirror with which to see the face of the darkness she feared, and she uses this to exact vengeance against the manifestation of her fear and self-loathing that drove her into the wilderness, that sought to unmake her there. This darkness takes the form of the Valravyn, the god of illusion, who pecks at her body like a carrion feeder before she rises in strength and vengeance to strike him down. This is by far and away the best boss fight in the whole game. The Valravyn, in addition to just being amazingly fun to say in Druth's accent,
Valravyn,
is a visually striking and vibrantly animated creature, and it introduces the bullet time mode that the mirror allows us to pull off, which slows down time and makes ghostly creatures revert to their physical form so that you can damage them. And as she lands the final blow, Senua realizes she never did beat the Valravyn when it came for her all those years ago in the wilds, that it made her consider self-slaughter, as Druth calls it. But if not for Druth, she wouldn't have this moment. This time it's different. This time she'll use its blood, its symbol, to unlock the way forward. The scene changes from dark and brooding to the beautiful light of a summer day. Now, this is my first indication that Ninja Theory may be telling us, ever so subtly, that most of this is a dramatization of the internal mental struggles that Senua was having, that they're using the art of gamesmanship to illustrate what would otherwise just be a frightening and unpleasant thing to live through, that what seemed to be an implacable storm cloud of bloody swordsmanship may have only occurred within Senua as she stands in an otherwise idyllic place, at least now. This may not be true, or entirely so, but it is an out given to the player to doubt Senua's account a little bit. But if all this is happening within Senua, does it make it any less potent, any more real as far as how it affects her? The answer, of course, is no. And as we leave this place, the narrator reflects on how Senua used to lie down and watch the clouds go by, seeing faces within their forms. Remember the pareidolia I mentioned earlier? Same deal.
Can you see the faces too? They're there. If you look for them.
Mother. Senua, you have the sight. Just like I do.
But we're soon visited by the ghost of Senua's mother Galena, priestess and a healer who's always encouraged Senua's ability to see, indicating that she and Senua share the same voices in their head and possibly even psychic abilities. But then the narrator turns on this idea, indicating that this was most likely a symptom of their shared darkness, their shared psychosis, not a mystical sight. The confusion here is important because in the druidic society she's a part of, and in the fantastical context of this game, it's sometimes hard to discern what is merely a mythologization of Senua's inner life, or a druidic belief in magic, or what is an actual psychotic symptom that we could still test for and recognize today. Now, a lot of this is actually intentionally conflated to introduce the idea that a lot of Senua's internalization of these concepts is based on some helpful output, but a lot of really bad ideas that she's been given about who she is over the course of her life. Now, remember this somewhat intentional convergence of conflicted readings around whether psychosis is tied to psychic abilities, because it will come up later. For now, we press on. The darkness of our exile in the wilderness now vanquished, we make our way towards confronting the fire giant Surt. But as Druth tells us to shed his blood, the narrator returns our memory to the wilderness yet again, to when we found Druth badly burnt from the fire he escaped from, as if to call into question whether we are truly fighting the god of fire, or if we're fighting for Druth, for the manifestations of the Northmen's evil, the form of the god they feared so much as to let Druth escape through the flames, but one who represents their fiery plundering of the Orkney Islands all the same. He says he knows of the darkness Senua speaks of, having experienced his own.
Hell will not give you the answers you want. But you mustn't look away from the horrors it does offer. Because you cannot overcome suffering if you refuse to look at it.
We make our way through various burning villages, igniting them into further flames as we unlock the symbols of fiery sacrifice to Surt, running past these nightmarish visions of bodies burning. While much of the game is up for grabs as to what is likely currently physically happening to Senua, this section seems very much a dramatic overlay to an otherwise mundane set of already burnt villages. This doesn't make it any less affecting for me the player or for Senua though. And as we leave the burning villages and make our way to Surt, Druth emboldens us with,
If I can survive the fire of Surt and escape my darkness, then so can you.
Druth may be a little rattled, but you can't fault his intentions. He's a stand-up guy, even in death. So, let's avenge our dear friend and show Surt the fire of our wrath. We crash into Surt's sanctum, our body engulfed in flames, as if on fire for the memory of Druth. Notably, every enemy so far has been humanoid, even Surt. I thought this was a boring design choice on my first playthrough until I realized that they're probably just meant to represent real people that Senua was encountering during a dramatized set of psychotic episodes. There's an argument to be made that everything that happens has some physically objective element to it, and that just because it seems fantastical doesn't mean it's a delusion, and that may very well be the case here, but I'm more inclined and more interested in this moment being one of the few moments in the game where Senua doesn't seem to be concerned merely with her own darkness, but that of another person. We spend so much time revolving around her actions of experience that seeing her branch out and realize that the darkness is worth taking on no matter where it crops up, not just in yourself, is the first step towards the more communal and interpersonal emphasis that the upcoming second game seems to be leaning towards. And we'll get more into that later. To that end, we hear a new voice, a new person in our head. A soft-spoken, tender voice tells us that we do not fight his battle alone, despite Senua's insistence that only she can fight the darkness now. This voice is Dillion, though the game doesn't make it a point to directly address him at this point. Senua laments the darkness takes over everything, tells Dillion's presence that she has to do this alone. Note too here that she thinks she can do this without her mental illness, without a part of her, which by the end of the game is a desire that she really has to grow out of in order to live with her condition and press on in true strength. Dillion then fades away, leaving us to face the horror of Surt. And while he's mechanically not nearly as interesting as the Valravyn, one cannot deny how terrifying and epic this fight feels. The battle's a bit too easy and makes his role as a mental obstacle a little unimpressive, but perhaps this plays into what Druth says next.
For every battle won, a greater battle takes its place.
This sounds a lot like the struggle of mental health due to chronic conditions, that every victory is just learning for the next test, which will inevitably come. We all fall eventually, even the gods, Druth says. But Druth says he's fulfilled his quest, and will do his best to see you fulfill yours. We've now avenged the memory of Druth and purged away his darkness the best we can, to go with the uncertainty of the wilds that the Valravyn either visited upon us or represented. So now, we have what we need to venture through the Helheim gate and face Hela herself. But as we move forward, we're beset by an intense loneliness, likely meant to represent a surge of depression, and from within that empty feeling comes a deep, dark voice that says,
"There is no one here but me."
We didn't lose the darkness back in the wilderness. This is the darkness that's been following us and won't let us go. And the fact that it now speaks with such authority, such strength, such condescension is highly alarming. We thought we were breaking through, but the voice leads us into the light, our war paint gone as if moving back into time before she became a warrior, at least one bent on revenge. But the light does not reveal a simpler, more beautiful time, but a horror we can't help but see. The body of our lover Dillion, who was torn apart by invading Northmen while Senua had retreated to the wilds to deal with her darkness. The contrast of sunlight with utter mental darkness and despair here is incredibly unmooring, and speaks to the fact that psychosis and conditions like it don't wait only for despair, that they can sometimes roll in at any time. More importantly, even in the midst of an otherwise idyllic time in your life, people can be suffering invisibly. There doesn't have to be a reason for it, and just making someone feel happy does not necessarily cure the onset of these conditions. Remember this for later, when we get to my main sticking point with how Hellblade handles mental health. More to the point of this scene, the darkness seeks to use this moment to pull Senua under, but then retreats into a strangely detached narrator persona, almost admiring of Senua's courage. The darkness even speaks one of the most beautiful lines in the game.
"They can break you, but not your promise. Even death won't keep you apart. Through his darkness you will find him. In your sword still beats a heart."
They can break you, but not your promise. Man, the idea that your conviction, your will, is what makes you strong against all obstacles is a powerful one. It may seem obvious or generic to say, but especially for those who deal with psychotic episodes or depression or hallucinations, what better hope is there than the affirmation that your will can endure and maybe even overcome, if not now, then someday, your immediate circumstances? While writing Hellblade's script, Tamim Antoniades said that he was surprised that recovery for those suffering from psychosis was not about curing these symptoms, but about finding ways to live with them. This was interesting to hear, as a contradicting viewpoint is expressed within the game by Dillion, the one we mentioned in the intro, and it's coming up very soon. Speaking of Dillion, the next chapter of SENUA'S journey is far more interested in his contributions to SENUA'S life and how he relates to SENUA'S father Zinbel, her mother Galena, and Dillion's father. Galena's visage visits us and tells us that Zinbel did not hate her, but he hates the spirit and hell that cry out to her, and she cannot resist their cries because it's her duty as a healer to help them. We're soon shocked away from this reminiscing over whether this is true by the terrifying appearance of Hela herself, crater-faced giant that almost crushes Senua, breaking her blade in the process and knocking her into the water below. When she comes to, she's staring at her reflection as the darkness speaks hateful venom into her ears. All that snaps her from this trance is using her broken blade to cauterize the head wounds she received when knocked off the bridge, leaving a visible scar. This physical, lasting damage that we see on Senua throughout the game seems to be indicating to us that no matter what's going on in Senua's head, there is something absolutely happening to her person in real life that may be off-screen, may be obscured by this grand narrative that she's instructing. Dillion then visits Senua again, and her wound cauterized, she rises to her feet and keeps going. We then learn about how Senua and Dillion fell in love. Senua first fell for him from a distance as she watched him practice his swordplay for the warrior trials.
How does he so effortlessly court the world and bliss?
If only she could do the same. See the world through eyes anew and dance with it, just like he does.
Dillion's honestly a bit of a manic pixie dream boy who sets Senua's world on fire when they meet and shows her a way to live beyond what she ever knew in the restrictive environment of her father Zinbel. But even this pristine memory is soon corrupted by the darkness, turning the world into a night of dead bodies and biting flames, and taunting her with her own inadequacies. And as if to prove a point, when she tries to pull the magic blue sword from the great tree here, she's blasted back and shown that 4 trials await her that must be completed in order to prove herself worthy. These warrior trials are my least favorite section. They just kind of drag on and they're the least fantastical and interesting to look at. There's a maze puzzle with looping hallways and a trick to know when to start going backwards or to take the right instead of the left or whatever, but I never really understood what they were going for here. This puzzle does end with one of the most important scenes of the game, though. Senua finds herself back in the moment when she tells her father that she's going to leave the village to get rid of her darkness with a boy named Dillion, who could help her to be normal. Zinbel says he can see the darkness speaking through her and that she is incurable and that only he can save her, just like he said to her mother. This is textbook narcissistic behavior, pretending to care for others and keeping them close so that you can control another person to make yourself feel powerful or useful. He strikes her, and Senua pulls a sword on him so that she can leave for good. And while this doesn't likely mean anything major, I do think it's very interesting how that Senua's actor Melissa Juergens is never looking right at the lens when performing. Her gaze is always just off to the side. This scene with Zinbel is the first or one of the first times that she ever directly addresses the window that the player occupies, as if her focus is razor sharp and direct and full of intent now, instead of, eyes darting around and not quite knowing where to put her gaze or her thoughts. I really like this subtle, if perhaps unintentional tidbit of direction. The next trial is an interesting one. The puzzle itself is a no-brainer, but it is engaging, requiring us to look through the eyes of a mask to see a new perspective, a new world that will open up a blockage or an otherwise locked door in the previous world. It's classic Soul Reaver stuff, but it's metaphorically really interesting to feel like we're playing around with Senua's symptoms and trying to make some sense of our window into reality just like she does on a daily basis. By adjusting her perspective through these masks, the scene comes into focus and materializes new objects. Apparently, this same perception, the fixation on patterns, shapes, and movements, is what allows Senua to pick up on Dillion's movements so quickly, and she becomes a very proficient fighter at a very fast rate once she joins his clan. Now, Senua left her family to be with Dillion and his clan in hopes of reinventing her life and getting a fresh mental perspective, but she's still struggling with her darkness. Dillion tries to comfort her by asking her to perhaps adjust her perception of how bad her darkness actually is.
So someone is afraid of the dark. Should we fix them by taking away their sight? Would you give up the beautiful world that you, and only you, can see just to be rid of your nightmares? Or is this the price you pay for the gift you have?
A gift that makes you so special in my eyes. Just another part of the person I love.
This seemingly positive message in mind, we then cut to a scene that tests the truth of its analysis. Senua, Dillion, and his warrior clan go down to a river to drink, but Senua somehow senses that there's something in the water that's not right. The rest of their company drinks and gets sick, a plague soon ravaging the village. They point the finger at Senua because she's different, new, and one of the only ones not affected, but also the one who suspiciously knew something was wrong with the water. These accusations devastate Senua, and she flees the village for the wilds. This is an important scene for ninja theory because it's meant to illustrate how fear and stigmatization is often as bad or worse than the mental disorder itself, as it often gives the sufferer no way to relieve their pain. So good on ninja theory for not shying away from this here or with Zenbell's harsh actions. But as empathetic as ninja theory is trying to be, they've unfortunately made some crucial mistakes on how we should view mental health, at least in my estimation. Let's start with Dillion's words.
Would you give up the beautiful world that you, and only you, can see just to be rid of your nightmares? Or is this the price you pay for the gift you have?
Dillion's meant to be a positive, encouraging contrast to all the cruelty that Senua's been subjected to because of her condition. But by telling her that depression, delusions, and the rest are just a trade-off for having a beautiful mind, he's not really comforting her. He's invalidating her ongoing pain with a platitude about how there's some supposed benefit her condition is giving her. In addition to the beautiful world that Dillion ascribes her unique perspective, Senua is able to use her pattern recognition skills to become a skilled fighter and can detect poison in water when no one else can. Now, perhaps writer Tamim Antoniades is attempting to celebrate neurodivergent excellence in general, to make Senua emblematic of the high cognitive functioning that, for instance, some autistic individuals exhibit, or just to inspire those of us who struggle with certain conditions to keep trying to do great things. After all, some studies, like the one by the British Journal of Psychiatry, do claim that creative brains are 90 times more likely to be schizophrenic, 62% more likely to have bipolar disorder, and 39% more likely to have depression, just to name a few. So there is some correlation between being highly creative and having some mental disorder. Okay, that's all well and good, and Antoniades confirms that he wrote Hellblade in order to highlight those among us who think differently and can construct new realities in their minds to help humanity progress through innovations in art and science.
Mental illness has been with us for as long as we have been on this planet, but why? Why hasn't evolution stamped out this weakness from within our gene pool? I often pondered this question until I realized that the question had an inbuilt flaw. It assumes that being and thinking differently is a weakness. The only reason we have computers, spacecraft, medicine, poetry, art, and yes, even video games is because individuals were able to simulate new abstract realities in their minds and share them with the rest of us. We need people to be willing to see differently in order for us to progress and survive as society. And we need to be open to these new ways of seeing.
All truisms, but I think he paints with too broad of a stroke here and ends up invalidating the suffering of many within this overly broad group of people who think differently. Don't take that to mean that I'm mad that someone would dare to attribute good things to the mentally disordered. It's actually quite the opposite. Telling someone whom we know experiences incredible hardship because of their condition that we've managed to imagine a world where all their troubles are just the price to pay for their superpowers veers away from appreciation into fascination and fantasy, where we invent headcanon lore where things like the often highly frustrating neuroses of hyperfixation that Leonardo reports gets positively spun into being highly competent in pattern recognition and sword fighting. The ability to have delusions that are often horrifying and disconcerting, if not simply mundane, but not always helpfully real, is turned into the ability to imagine new worlds. But I'd argue that we should appraise the mind that experiences both creativity and disorder to simply be a creative mind that happens to have disorder. Correlation does not equal causation, since we know that neurotypical folks can be creative too. And sometimes a certain subset of those who have mental disorder can be more creative in correlation with that, but it's not direct. And if we go all the way to the other direction and feel like we have to attribute hyperfunction to all disordered behaviors and symptoms in order to make us feel better about them, we romanticize other people's sufferings into positive assets that they can wield, but in ways that do them no more tangible good than the hallucinations do in the first place. Writer and psychosis sufferer Dillion drives this point home in a Polygon article, and I quote, "I stopped and wondered about how many times in my own life my mental illness has aided me. No intrusive thought has ever saved me from harm or given me direction. Visual hallucinations have always been horrifying or mundane. Flashbacks have never offered profound insight. Perhaps my hypervigilance has kept me from danger. It's also made me lash out at perceived but unrealized threats. I'm not even dissociating through the process of writing this article. That would have at least removed me from the anxieties of writing. I'm certain my mental illness has never benefited me or society," acclaimed Ninja Theory co-founder Tamim Antoniades muses on at the end of a documentary feature included in Hellblade. "I'm not some mystical aberration helping the world progress." Now, far from being a self-deprecating, self-hating statement, this is just trying to bring into focus the real struggle of someone that has these conditions, not romanticizing it and not attributing positive aspects to the deeply negative parts of the condition. After all, if disorder were an asset in and of itself, then how come we've never seen someone ask for more in order to become smarter or more creative? It just doesn't track. My point isn't to dissuade us from championing those among us that have disorder, and I greatly appreciate what Antoniades and Ninja Theory do in Hellblade to help us empathize with the experience of psychosis sufferers, and appreciate how strong and discerning they have to be in order to carry on their daily life. That's a deeply kind and valuable mission. But I am frustrated that Ninja Theory, for all their research and for all their good intentions, keeps going and going to the point of getting so wound up in positivity that it almost becomes toxic positivity and gaslighting, to use all of our millennial TikTok terms at once, where we think we're better off than we are, almost make ourselves feel better about their condition when they're telling us point blank that these things are not desirable. When it sucks, and we have to be there to help them weather the storm. I fear that in Ninja Theory's haste to do all they can for this community, they may have gotten a little carried away with the romanticized version of psychosis they wish was true, inventing kind of a magical superpower suite for something, when we simply have to accept that standing in the breach is the best we can do many times. Fortunately, Ninja Theory corrects the message a bit by the end, but it's worth noting that for all their good intentions and for all the praise lavished upon them, oftentimes it gets overlooked that Ninja Theory still talks about this subject with a decidedly fanciful neurotypical perspective. But we'll touch a little bit more on this later. Well, that was a long sidebar, so where were we? Well, unlike the misguided but well-meaning platitudes of Dillion, Senua starts to believe the negative voice implanted in her psyche by her father Zinbel, and starts to believe his assertions that she's cursed, always has been, and always will be. Because look, now Dillion's father is dead because of the plague that came from the water. Did she bring it? Is she responsible? To the outsider, of course not. But Senua can trick herself into feeling more responsible because she feels guilty about her very existence already. This brings us to one of the most visually arresting scenes I've ever witnessed in a video game, the sea of corpses. Rotting hands reach out to pull her down, promising vengeance for her supposed crimes. Heads snake out in agony, begging for recompense. The darkness chides you for your disbelief in your father, your gods, and that this is the reward you now sow. Soon we hear our mother Galena's voice, the voice of yet another dead, trapped soul here. The darkness tells us that while our mother had the same affliction, she gave herself to the gods. She didn't retreat, and that if Senua had just stayed in line and followed her example, the world would have been better off. Senua is very tempted to give in as she relives her mother's death, but remembers Dillion's words. The hardest battles are fought in the mind, and Dillion gave her the sword to win those battles, his words. We press on to the interior of Helheim and encounter Garm, its ferocious guardian wolf that will kill us unless we stay in the light, and this results in an incredibly atmospheric and intense fight as we stand in the middle of a lit arena while the beast lunges at us from the darkness, even turning out the light at times. This, in combination with the Alan Wake-esque jumping from light source to escape this creature, is one of the most terrifying sequences in the game, but it's also one of the most economically metaphorical. Stay in the light, or you lose to the darkness. We meet our mother here again and realize that she couldn't stand the darkness and took her own life to escape it. She goes to her death blaming herself and calling the harsh manner her husband Zinbel dealt with her tough love to save her from herself. But as the narrator says,
people think of evil as an unnatural, invisible force, and so invoke the gods for protection.
But evil can come from the hand behind the gods. A familiar hand.
Zinbel tried to cure Senua's mental anguish, too, by keeping her in solitary confinement inside a deep pit, his deeply narcissistic tendencies pretending to do this because of his religion, when it was merely the argument he thought was the most convincing to the wife and child he verbally and physically abused. But the voice I've been calling the darkness so far dissociates from this persona.
All this time, I've wanted to protect you from the truth that would have destroyed you a long time ago.
The
but you have conquered your darkness at every turn. You deserve to see behind the veil of darkness.
And take me to the mountain to trust him as deep as we can go.
I won't stand in your way.
She has to trust him.
You will not survive what is in there.
I know.
As we push to this point, the Furies beg us not to leave them behind, as if pushing forward will truly relieve us of our dark burden. Senua traps them inside a mirror that captures her reflection and moves on without these voices. But Senua realizes that this is not like the epic stories where the good guys and the bad guys are clearly defined, where the path is always clear within, if not without. Senua becomes aware that she must go on, but also aware that she is not part of a grand narrative like she thought. A great dragon of self-hatred must be defeated, but perhaps she's no dragon slayer after all. Oh, speaking of dragons that aren't fun to fight, go watch my Dragon's Dogma 2 review. What? To that end, we approach a portal that resembles the rune circlet just like the one we hear Druth telling us epic Norse tales from when we interact with it. This is the sum of his contribution to our life, the great heroic emboldening, but one which we may not have more use for. But the need for story, for the next great battle that there is always to be won, as Druth told us earlier, is always necessary, always being asked of us. And if we've collected all the stories that Druth told us throughout the game, a secret and very important scene awaits us. One last story from Druth that could change everything. When Druth was a slave to the Northmen, he sought to barter his escape for information, leading them to more treasure and slaves from the Pictus tribes in the end.
But I wasn't the only one. Another came to the Northmen willingly, offering a bargain, a man in black from your lands. And he was offered safe passage for his treason. In the end, Senua, it isn't the gods that cause us so much suffering, but those closest to us.
Whatever do you mean?
We about to find out. Before us, rising from the darkness, is our mother as she's burned at the stake. She didn't take her own life. She was put to death by her husband Zinbel. Zinbel, who manifests behind us as a man in black.
She has nothing to fear anymore. The gods have saved your mother. Through my hand.
This Zinbel, this man in black, is so drunk on the power that false piety to his gods gives him that he killed his own wife because she defied him and even sold out his own people to the Northmen. And even though it appears that Galena and Senua share a lot of the same symptoms, it's actually her father's madness that torments her, not her mother's. This is a really important distinction that Ninja Theory makes here, and it actually flies in the face of the kind of weird thing they did earlier with Dillion. Here we see a contrast between those who have mental illness and are evil, and those who have mental illness and are ostensibly good. It's not the disorder that breeds the evil, the immorality. It's just like anything else in any other person, what you do with the hand you're dealt that determines how good or how bad you are. In this case, the madness that Senua inherits from her father is not the mental disorder, it's the wicked, cruel behavior that he exhibits towards her, and that he makes her believe she deserves. He is the cause of darkness, the perpetrator of it, the voice dissociated from the darkness earlier out of arrogance, as if it thinks everyone else has something wrong with them, and not it. The burning body of our mother fades into the body of Hela. We fight through endless hordes of Northmen, Zinbel chiding us as to why we keep fighting if the darkness is a lie.
Where is Dillion's soul if the darkness is a lie? How you saved him?
I persisted in Senua's delusion for 20 to 30 minutes to win this fight, forgetting that this fight is actually unwinnable. This uncertainty plays out exactly like Ninja Theory hoped, though. My hands and wrists were getting quite sore, and I was starting to wonder just how much longer I had to fight to win. And when I realized I couldn't win, that I was designed to surrender, I had to manage a wry smile. How awfully immersive of you, Ninja Theory. Once I realized that this type of struggle was not going to be victorious, I laid me down to rest. Senua fights within herself to accept it, but realizes that there is no malevolent darkness outside of herself, that Dillion is gone, and that nothing she can do, no grand quest she can invent or relive like one of Druth's stories will bring him back, nor will it bring back the days of light that she once had with him. She kneels in submission to Hela, saying that if she doesn't take Dillion's soul, then she might as well kill Senua because she's got nothing left. A deft but easy to miss detail is that while the camera pans to show us what she's looking at before Senua admits defeat, Senua admits defeat to the camera, to us, the audience. Notably, outside of the faceless Norsemen and the boss monsters, Senua hasn't made direct eye contact with any other character. Senua speaks to us, one of her voices, herself, Because Hela, despite forming out of the burnt body of Senua's mother, isn't anyone but Senua's self-image. She doesn't look at the visage to speak to it because she's talking to herself. But at the end of her great come and get it speech, Hela runs us through with our own blade, and Senua falls to the ground, being visited by the memory of Dillion once more, who warns that fearing loss is to be controlled by it.
Only then can we let go of our fear. And emerge from our darkness.
And so Hela picks up Dillion's head and lets it fall into the abyss below, the camera panning back up to reveal the fractured body of Hela was Senua all along, represented as if by a statue made of the clays of various traumas, the runes of an invading culture inscribed on her skin, the burning flesh of Druth and our mother, the hole in our head symbolizing the damage our mind has withstood. And as this colossus of our past trauma falls away, our strongest narrator voice within Senua leaves us this message of hope.
Never forget what it is like to see the world as a child, Senua. Every autumn leaf is like a work of art. Every rolling cloud a moving picture. Every day a new story. We too emerge from this magic, like a wave from the ocean, only to return to the sea. Do not mourn the waves, the leaves and the clouds. Even in darkness, the wonder and the beauty of this world never leaves us. It is always there, waiting to be seen again.
As self-knowledge swells within Senua, the Furies return and are afraid that they will be squashed out for good with Senua's new perspective. But to their surprise, Senua draws them together as if by magic into herself and walks away, her physical scars remaining, but realizing that a house divided against itself will fall, so Senua must accept herself, her Furies and all.
Follow us. We have another story to tell.
So, pretty cool stuff, huh? Hellblade is a very moving, epic adventure that probably mostly takes place as a battleground of metaphor and self-reflection, and it's brought to life by some truly incredible acting, motion capture technology, and the genius idea to use 3D binaural sound in one camera so that scenes feel like they're one long, intimate take. It's dark, fantastical, utterly beautiful, and cinematically intelligent in ways that few games are. Its puzzles and combat aren't best in class, but they are better than most games that feature this much walking and talking. But I wouldn't be surprised if someone played this game and found it a little boring, perhaps a little pretentious. In many ways, Hellblade is just kind of a walking sim with decent puzzles and combat, with a standard metaphorical world that mines mental struggles for imaginative, dreamlike set pieces and imagery. The character will recount their trauma, face it, and become stronger to deal with it in the end. Pretty standard stuff, right? And in that way, Ninja Theory isn't technically reinventing the wheel, but their unique artistry is what makes the immediacy of this virtual reality come alive. It compounds the intensity of Senua's unshared reality even further as we struggle to parse out what she's responding to and why, as we're influenced by the constant voices and physical stimuli just as she is. How much of it is happening outside of her perception doesn't truly matter metaphorically or at all if it still affects her so deeply as to have this profound of an impact on her. And so it must be accounted for in how we treat anyone in front of us who is experiencing similar things. But some reviewers, like Jason Faulkner of Might, dislike the ambiguity of Senua's mental state. Faulkner says the portrayal of Senua's mental illness would be better served showing both sides of her story, what's in her head and what's actually happening. Faulkner further laments that if you took away the conceit that Senua lives with psychosis and replaced it with real demons, ghosts, or dark magic, how different would the game be? That is a fair point, and I think it's one of the unavoidable problems with trying to convey something that by definition can't be experienced unless you're literally experiencing it, so approximation from neurotypicals in a highly dramatized but also entertaining fashion is likely the best you're going to get. But where I think Faulkner desires more specificity, he also seeks to simply have Ninja Theory make an entirely different game. The ambiguity is actually the point of this game existing in the first place. Part of Hellblade's enjoyment comes from it being an almost entirely constructed reality of its own that we have to parse, or just accept. It's never clear if what we are seeing has existed, does exist, or is being remixed by Senua's memory or atypical perception. The game does a great job of trying not to push that one reality is tantamount over the other. The very reason why both are plausible is because they're both important. Both what happened, and also what lasting marks on Senua have been left. They affect Senua so deeply that she can't help but be swayed in real life. And in order to reach her, these epic stories need to be addressed on their own terms. I think it's very likely that much of what Senua sees is merely the revisiting of traumatic memories in dramatic form, maybe even as she revisits important places in her life where these things actually happened. But I also think it's very likely that she's been ravaging the Orkney countryside, messing up Northmen right and left as a revenge for Dillion's death. She endures far too many physical wounds that stay with her through the end of the game, and her enemies are far too humanoid for no apparent reason in a supposedly fantastical dreamscape to not likely represent people she's actually killing in real life as she goes. That's just a hunch, but I think it's a defensible one. Of course, the demands of being exciting and entertaining as a game sometimes muddy the waters on how realistic or educational a game can be at the same time. Dr. Paul Fletcher did intimate that he's going to start using Hellblade clips to illustrate his points in his lectures instead of his old material because it's such a good representation of episodes of psychosis, and how many people with psychosis have reported their accuracy. Some even, like Dillion, we quoted earlier, who struggled to finish the game and had to take long breaks in between panic attacks. That's pretty intense, man. Ninja Theory expertly captures the visceral nature of psychotic episodes and the crushing isolation that often accompanies it from cruel or misunderstanding people. But Ninja Theory's overly imaginative lore that they've headcanoned for mental illness as a form of superpower is often just not very representative of the broader categories as a whole, nor is it respectful to those who suffer from these supposed superpowers on a sometimes moment-by-moment basis, as people like Leonardo reported.
But for about 20 years now, I've been suffering from psychosis. I hear voices and experience delusions, everywhere, all day and all night. For the most part, I've done what I can to fight it and ignore the cacophony of noise and calls to harm or kill myself. I've learned to meditate, clear my mind, focus my energy. However, it's not pleasant and I'm in a constant struggle with it.
Mayhaps it's also just the byproduct of what happens if you try and take a supposedly nuanced and realistic take on mental illness and then mash it together with an outrageous fantasy action game with psychic abilities and gods. So perhaps Ninja Theory got caught in their own trap, but at least we can appreciate that Ninja Theory made the effort and put a lot of other helpful things on display inside of what is an otherwise excellent video game regardless. So that's Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, one of the greatest cinematic video game experiences I've certainly ever had. I'm really excited too for this next entry, as while Senua's Sacrifice dealt with Senua reckoning with her own condition as it relates to her past, the new game has her dealing with others as a leader of men, which I think is really exciting new territory that the first game didn't touch on. I also wonder if this game will be Senua's revenge tale against her father who betrayed her people, killed her mother, and hated Dillion. That'd be a pretty badass reason to get all these guys together and, maybe have followed Zinbel back to a Viking outpost where he has their protection or something, but who knows. I'm also a little unsure if that's even in the cards, as the gameplay trailer seems to have us fighting a giant in Iceland with the help of our guys, who very much seems like a giant that everybody else is seeing, not a figment of our imagination. Either way, the game looks incredibly high fidelity and exciting, and I'm here for it. I'm sure I'll end up reviewing this one too, amidst my incredibly busy self-imposed schedule this year, so check back for that review as well. But until then, I'd just like to say how much fun I had making this video on what is a very good video game, and one which caused me to really examine a lot of my own perspectives, and perspectives that may actually change as I hear back from you as to how well I analyze what's here, and how well Ninja Theory did as well. So I hope this was helpful, truthful, and enlightening in some way, and I hope that Senua's Sacrifice moved you or moves you as much as it did me. I don't think it's any coincidence that Hellblade 2 is coming out in May either, which is, at least in the United States, Mental Health Awareness Month. Now, I've personally seen mental disorder ravage the lives of my family members to the point of self-harm, and it greatly saddens me. So let's take this time, especially, to think on how to be hyper-vigilant, if you will, on behalf of those among us who have these mental conditions, to make sure that we're acutely aware of why this is happening to those we see suffering, and to do our best to be available, to be a shoulder to cry on, to aid them where we can and how they ask us to, realizing that the hardest part is that we often just can't fix most of it, and to accept the whole person for all that they are, just like everyone has to do with us, and not come up with platitudes that make us feel like we're helping and deny them the truth of what they're feeling. Sometimes the hardest part of having a servant's heart in these things is that you can't solve everything, and that you just have to stand in the breach with them and help them withstand whatever it is they're going through.
I don't know what's inside.
Don't be afraid.
I'd like to leave you with a passage from Corinthians from the New Testament that reminds me of Senua's journey to cherish the goodness in the world and to love herself. I hope it's of some value to you as well. Love never fails. But where there be prophecies, they shall fail. Where there are tongues, they shall cease. Where there is knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away with. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And now abideth these three, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. And a huge shout out to those of you generous enough to support my work by subscribing to my Patreon. I have to thank Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Hey Blondie, He Acts Show, and M for their contributions. And a special thanks to the Nth Review and James Wyatt for subscribing to my Patreon's highest tier. If you'd like to be part of the reason this channel gets bigger and better, feel free to go over to patreon.com/high-functioning-medium, or you can become a YouTube channel member, or if you prefer, you can donate at Ko-fi. Also check out my GOG and NordVPN affiliate links to contribute to the channel with no cost to you. God bless you everyone, and I'll see you soon.